It's the most popular film franchise of all time, has created some of the most recognisable characters in the history of film, has lines that everyone around the world will recognise, but the original trilogy didn't have a solid visual style, and in fact it had 3 different cinematographers who each had very different styles but built on what the last one had created. However, in my opinion, you can't really top The Empire Strikes Back, and whilst I wasn't there when it was first released, I can imagine it blowing audiences away back in 1980. So, in today's video, I want to take a bit of a different route to my other videos, where I'll instead be looking at how a cinematographer built on a previous DP's work in the same franchise. Now, obviously there are 9 films in Star Wars, more if you count Rogue One and Solo, so I'm only going to be looking at A New Hope and Empire, but granted this video does well, I'll be back looking at the sequels and potentially the prequels. But anyway, today I'll be covering what's changed from A New Hope, as well as why Empire looks so incredible. I'm also not going to be talking about the VFX today, as whilst it was incredible for the time, my mind at least is skewed, all thanks to the incredible work we see today, especially on episodes 7, 8 and 9. Star Wars has had a lot of cinematographers, and some of the time the director didn't exactly get along with them, which is exactly what happened on A New Hope. Now, Gilbert Taylor was an extremely talented cinematographer, shooting films for Kubrick and Hitchcock, but when it came to George Lucas, let's just say they wanted a different style. Gilbert wanted a more artistic look, and Lucas was aiming for a more naturalistic style, almost documentary-like. Now, as far as I can tell, Lucas actually wanted to get rid of Taylor. However, if he did, the rest of the department would walk with him. Eventually, Lucas got his way and he went with another cinematographer for The Empire Strikes Back, but I still think it's safe to say that A New Hope has some of the best shots of the franchise. And that gets me wanting to talk about the differences between the two, because side by side, these are very different looking films, although the basis is still there. Now, to start, with A New Hope, we have a very clean palette. The frame isn't dirty, we rarely have smoke or haze, the lighting is clear and the compositions are defined. Now, it's a good looking film, there's no denying that, but was it what George Lucas had in mind? No, it wasn't. But it did set up Peter Suschitzky with a loose style that he could adapt from with the help of the directors and producers. So when it did come to shooting The Empire Strikes Back, Suschitzky needed to do something to set his film apart, and he did. The most obvious additions are more low-key lighting, more colourful lighting, smoke, silhouettes, and more abstract compositions. So, when it comes to the lighting in The Empire Strikes Back, as I just mentioned, it's a lot more low-key. Shadows are more pronounced, we aren't engulfed by light in every scene, and if we are, there's a lot more depth going on. Now, these are all things that make a film more visually interesting. They don't necessarily enhance the storytelling, but they do make it more interesting to watch. However, that isn't to say that it doesn't help tell the story, as in a lot of scenes it does. For example, creating mystery with a silhouette, but I'll get onto lighting Vader in a bit. So I think when Luke meets Yoda for the first time is a great example of why The Empire Strikes Back looks so much more interesting, as it's a scene where I can pull a similar one from A New Hope. Now, straight off the bat, the colour is deeper, there's more contrast, and before you talk about stock, they both used Eastman 100T and C-series lenses. But then the use of fog, low-key yet hard lighting makes all of the difference in feel. However, even on a budget of $30 million, the construction budget was slim, meaning only the foreground could be built for quite a few scenes. However, with a background in indie films, notably the Rocky Horror Picture Show, Suschitzky knew what he had to do, and that mainly consisted of using light and colour. Then, when you pair this with some black drapes and a good amount of smoke, you create some of the most famous shots in cinema history. But now for the question on everybody's minds. How do you go about lighting the most famous villain of all time? Well, that would probably be pretty simple if it weren't for a couple of factors. Mainly, he's wearing a shiny black helmet. Now, if you were to do your usual 3-point lighting setup, it would look fine, but you'd have reflections of the light on the helmet, and that's no good whatsoever. So instead, Suschitzky opted for lighting him with large pieces of fabric and bouncing light off of them. Now, this not only creates a nice broad light, but it also creates a rather soft one. Now, from looking at a few stills and clips, I can confidently say that this technique was later used on Return of the Jedi and I think Revenge of the Sith. However, when it comes to Rogue One, Greg Fraser has seemingly taken a different route, as whilst the light is still soft, there are no significant reflections on the helmet. If we move past lighting though, I think it's safe to say that the compositions and overall perspective of The Empire Strikes Back is much more significant, and I mean that in the way that there's a lot more in the range of shots we see. We move up and down with our characters, we go into a low angle, we go into a high angle. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, it's interesting. In A New Hope, whilst there is variation, it feels much more generic, which is understandable when you are starting a franchise, even if the DP didn't think so. But after seeing the later films, I can't help but see a wasted opportunity. But more about the storytelling in this. What can we learn from how Suschitzky composed these shots? Well, to start off with the basics of power dynamics, we have low angles and high angles, as well as eye level, but it was quite rare to see that, unless it's in an incredibly mutual scene between a couple of characters. We are often looking up at characters though, when Vader is first introduced for example, or even when Solo is talking to Leia in the first 10 minutes. Now, it's rare to see Vader in anything above eye level, which makes sense when you realise he is the most important being in the film and they do end up winning. But just to quickly touch on their fight at the end, the use of low angle shots almost shows equivalence between the two sides, at least in the beginning. And then when you pair it with an incredible silhouette, a mysterious blue smoke and a classic orange and blue contrast, you have one of the most beautiful shots of the franchise. And then we get to the famous part.
No, I am your father.
So what does make it good? Well, the inventive use of lighting, and on that note, I think it's safe to say that if the budget was bigger, we wouldn't have gotten a film that looked this good. Then, how Suschitzky decided to compose the frame, utilising position to his advantage in order to tell the story. And you can't forget the lighting of Vader, a villain who modernised villainry. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Notice if you did, if you have a recommendation for an analysis, leave it down below. Thanks so much for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time. Bye!